Today, what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about my own life. And I realize I didn't introduce myself, although in a way, what I'm going to do today is kind of a longer introduction. But I'll just say briefly that I am also a member of the board. I joined about 10 years ago. It's pretty amazing that it's been that long. I was a seminarian when I joined. And I am a ordained full fellowship UU minister. And I'm also an ordained Soto Zen priest. I believe that I'm one of only two with those dual ordinations, the other one being the very well-known James Ford, who was very much of a mentor for me as I was considering seminary. And so, this reality that all of you who are here on this call probably feel in one way or another of walking two paths, of being on two paths, two spiritual paths, has been something that's been very alive in me for a long time. And a while back, I was approached by one of the editors of the Lion's Roar magazine to do a piece on what that means for me, what that experience was. And so what I thought I would do is share from that piece of writing, not just reading it to you, but kind of reading and talking about it. And then we'll have a chance for all of us to reflect on that with each other. That's the plan. This was not my title for this, which is what I sent into them, was rejected. So what the actual title, if you look, this is gosh, I think it's February 2022, I want to say, or 2020. So maybe somebody can check. I can't remember. It's a while ago. But the title that they gave it was Two Paths, One Life, which is a really nice title. But this was my title, which I think is funnier, which is Two-Headed Camel, the life of a trans-religious Zen priest, rejected by the editorial board. Oh, 2022. I thought it was February 2022. Thank you. Thank you, Jake. So I'm just going to share because I don't think I need to do a lot of introduction because you're going to be learning a fair amount about me through this writing. I am an ordained Soto Zen priest and an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister. In an average week, I might give the Sunday sermon from the pulpit of an old stone Unitarian Universalist church in central Illinois. By the way, I'm not currently serving that church. I needed to leave for health reasons, but I hope to be back in at least part-time ministry sometime soon. Wearing a robe and a colorful stole, and the next night I might be giving an online Dharma talk via Zoom for a Zen center in Chicago or Santa Fe, wearing black kuromo, which is the traditional robes, and rakusu, it's my rakusu. On any given day, I might meet with an older member of my congregation to talk through a thorny family conflict. And then later that day, that very same day, I might be sitting with an earnest Zen student to talk together about living the Zen precepts. So that's what my life has been since I went into ministry, this constant dance of these two ways of being of service. Years ago, when I was in seminary, I heard someone describe herself as trans-religious. That term really resonated with me. And over my time in Zen practice, which predated seminary by several decades, seminary and ministry, I've realized that I am not alone in being trans-religious. And there are many people now who could call themselves some version of that term. I've met Methodist pagans. I've met Catholic Zen students. There are many of them. I've met Jewish Sufis. I've met Vajrayana practitioners who also practice African spirituality. Nearly every combination of tradition and practice that can be imagined has been practiced. And I'm not speaking of people who have a kind of dilettante interest in more than one tradition. I'm talking about people who have really practiced, really given their life to more than one religious or spiritual path. I think of the Dharma teacher Jan Willis, who was our convo presenter before the pandemic, really extraordinary, gifted, very early Western Vajrayana practitioner and academic, who wrote a book called Dreaming Me, Black, Buddhist, and Baptist. So she is a beautiful example. And it was one of the reasons we were really interested in having her come speak to us. Or the time that I was visiting a tiny remote Catholic monastery in the mountains of Italy, one of the very first Western monasteries after the time of the Desert Fathers. It was actually founded by Desert Fathers from Syria. And in the crypt below the chapel of this ancient, ancient church, I walked down there and there are Black Zen cushions, Zabutons and Zafus sitting there, in a line in the crypt. I never found out why they were there, but my sense was that those monks were practicing some form of meditation together. When I was training for the UU ministry, a seminary friend asked me what percentage I thought of myself as Zen Buddhist versus UU. She said 60-40, 50-50. And it was amazing because I didn't even think about it. I just laughed and I said 100% and 100%. That's what I am. I don't know if this is resonating for you, but this really, it was so clear. And by that, I meant that my two practices and traditions are completely interrelated, completely interpenetrating. There's only one me, more or less. And so how could it be divided in some way inside me? And I would still say that's true all these years after. So I am, and I'm not saying this to brag, although you do get bragging rights for this in the UU world. I am a sixth generation Unitarian. And that's because my great grandmother, who lived along with several generations after that of my family, lived in a small town in Western Iowa. And some of you, maybe who know your UU history, might have heard of the Iowa Sisterhood, which was a group of women ministers led by the extraordinary Mary Safford in the 19th century, in the second half of the 19th century, who ordained and started congregations and served at a time when there were really practically no women of any tradition as ordained clergy. And in this little town, Cherokee, Iowa, where I come from, the women of my family became passionate Unitarians, and they invited Mary Safford to come and be the first minister of this little tiny church in this small town. And I found a couple of years ago the obituary of my great-great-great-grandmother, Jane Potter, and it read, this is from 1901, which is when she died. It read, Mrs. Potter became a charter member of the Unitarian Church in Cherokee when it was organized 10 years ago. It was a moment of rare joy to her when, with her husband, children, and older grandchildren standing beside her, all pledged their loyalty to the higher life of religious ideals and strivings. How amazing that that was in her obituary. It was that important to her. And of course, in this article, I talk a little bit about why I, all these generations later, feel such a connection to Unitarian Universalism. And a lot of it is our history of really showing up in a big way for the progressive movements that started in the 19th century and continued through the 20th century. And of course, we are non-creedal, which is part of the reason that I think it's even easier for us to be able to really, with a lot of sincerity, be on more than one religious path. So, of course, You can be an atheist UU, you can be a humanist UU, you can be a Christian UU, you can be a Jewish UU, and you can be a Buddhist UU, among the many pagan UU, many possibilities. And I don't know what the current number is, but I remember at one point, somebody looked at this, and about 10% at least of the 1,200 or so UU congregations around the country had a Buddhist group, an active Buddhist group associated with it. I love that people are putting things in the chat. It's fun. I can't look at them a lot, but I'll get to look at them later. And I think the number is probably quite a bit higher than that. And part of our job as the UUBF is to try to keep track of this. So thank you to all who registered and put in the name of your group, if you have one, and who the contact person is, so we can update our records, because that's one of the ways that people find those groups is through our website. So, you know, I grew up UU. My mother was also UU. She was actually married to a UU minister before my father. And she really, really raised me with those really strong UU values. I feel like it's in my bones. But as a young person who felt a very strong awareness of everything from what had happened to Native people and what was continuing to happen, what was happening to the environment, what was happening around nuclear war and the dangers of, you know, a worldwide nuclear war. I knew that as a UU, what I was supposed to do was roll up my sleeves and do something about this. But I also, I didn't feel grounded. I felt so afraid and so lost in a way, in a spiritual way. And so in a way, as a young person, the faith and values of my mother's mid-century humanist UU way didn't fully support me as I stumbled forward into adulthood. And when I was about 11 or 12, I found the books of Alan Watts and began reading them. And I just had such a feeling of recognition. Just felt like he was saying the truth about things. And of course, Alan Watts, which I didn't know at the time, was also trans-religious. He was an Anglican minister, an Anglican priest who also studied Eastern religions. So, you know, it was really a dilemma for me to be so aware. I think this is true of a lot of young UUs, but not having any kind of way to become more grounded. But in my teens, I began learning meditation, and first Vipassana in my early 20s, and then Soto Zen in my later 20s. And I studied for many, many years with Zoketsu Norman Fisher. Some of you may have heard of him, who is very, very actively engaged as a Jewish Buddhist. So he runs, you know, he has sanghas actually all over the country, and also in Canada and in Mexico. But he also has, and has for many years, had a contemplative Jewish community organization that study Jewish contemplative practices. So really, there's no way to get away from this way that so many of us are on more than one path. So for me, I felt like really encountering the Dharma and wonderful teachers in my 20s probably saved my life. So part of the reason that I am so dedicated to this practice and to working with other people is out of just sheer gratitude for what it's given me and allowed my life to be. And not only am I UU and Buddhist, but I'm also a Zen and Vipassana student. So I have also done long Vipassana retreats, 1 month and 3 months retreats, and I sit them in my Zen robes. And sometimes there are Tibetan monks sitting and Tibetan nuns sitting there in their robes as well. So we don't have to just, there's nothing wrong with being along one narrow path. But if you are called to receive wisdom from more than one tradition, I feel like it has really enriched my life. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. So you might be wondering, well, what happened to the UU that grew up there and now is all involved with all of this Zen Buddhism? In my 40s, I walked into a little UU fellowship in Flagstaff, Arizona, Beacon. Maybe some of you know Beacon. And I was going through a super hard time. I'd actually had a really major health crisis. I was supposed to start graduate school. I couldn't start. And I walked into this beautiful little congregation and just sat in the back and wept. I felt so at home, so much that I was with my own people. And at the time, this was when gay marriage was still not legal, either nationally or in Arizona, which of course is a very conservative state, but it was legal in California. At that point, that was the only place gay marriage was legal. I sound like I'm speaking about ancient history, but it wasn't that long ago. And I think it was either 2007 or 2008. And all these long time couples from the congregation were going to California and getting married and then coming back, and they would stand up during joys and sorrows and they would say, we got married this weekend after 30 years together. And everybody would stand up and clap and cheer, and I'd weep because I just thought, this is how it should be. This is how it should be. And this is what makes our faith so beautiful. And I started to think about UU ministry. And that's when I reached out to James Ford, because I knew he could let me know whether it was a crazy idea to be a Zen priest who was also a UU minister. And he said, no, it's not a crazy idea. I did it. Though James Ford's a little wild, but still. So part of the reason I think I was drawn to ministry is that having been that young person in a UU congregation who needed something, was fed by Unitarian Universalist values, but needed a practice in order to live in this world the way it is. I felt like, well, maybe I can take at that point, decades of practice back to these communities that are so truly mine and have something to offer that will be of benefit to these wonderful people who do such good work in the world. And I found that to be really true. I find that people of all ages, even people who have perhaps never been engaged with Buddhist practice before, even just, shall we just call it contemplative practice, have really found it helpful in the congregations that I've served, and that it really provides a support in these really extraordinarily difficult times. And, the Buddha said the Dharma is medicine, and medicine, you're not going to hold back the medicine that could be good medicine for someone in their life and in their commitments. And that medicine can heal. And so, of course, we should offer that medicine where we can. So, even during the pandemic, there were all these interesting ways that that the Dharma showed up. For instance, I was asked by a local person who's a really visionary leader of a Black community organization, where it's an organization that helps people process trauma and find resilience. And they asked me to come online and lead meditations to support people who were experiencing trauma. And I did another, during the pandemic, I was asked by the local Japanese Cultural Center if I would do a monthly Zazen meditation in their garden, all by myself, just with a camera on me, that they would do on Facebook Live it's a campus Japanese Cultural Center. And there were people on campus who got back to them and said it was the best moment of their month to be able to sit for that 20 minutes, looking at the leaves falling behind me in the garden as I sat there. That was the only movement on the screen. And during that time, actually, and I wrote about this for the UU Sangha. And by the way, I am the editor, often behind on getting my various issues out, but we will have one coming out before the end of the year. But I wrote about the group that started from the UU congregation sitting outside in the trees, actually near this Japanese Cultural Center. And 3 years later, they are still sitting every week under the trees together, winter and summer, rain and snow, they are there. So this life, the part of my life that I have lived monastically and on retreat, getting up early in the morning, wearing black robes, being in silence, seems pretty different on the surface from the life that I live now with Zoom calls and meetings and joining members of my congregation for Black Lives Matter marches and protesting against oil pipelines. But for me, it's all one life. It's all one commitment to the Bodhisattva way, to the way of giving my life to this world, to bring something a little better to everybody that I meet. And I feel like that commitment flows like water through all the different ways that I show up. And then I just ended it with, and again, this got cut by the editors, 21st century two-headed camel that I might be, I am grateful for these two paths that run like healing rivers through my blood and bones, spilling over into this world so in need of healing too.